Clint Lamb, who covers Alabama for Next Round Live and for Cover Crimson and just all types of things. Clint, where can people follow your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Clint R. Lamb or covercrimson.com. Obviously, that's where we have a message board community over there. So you can follow that. Or we also have a YouTube channel, Cover Crimson, where you can go check out all of our video content. We got a bunch of people. Jake Coker, former Alabama quarterback. Mike Johnson, former All-American offensive lineman for Alabama. We got Mick Gillespie, Chris Marler, a great team over there at Cover Crimson on the YouTube channel.
Great stuff. All right, Clint, let's dive into this. What do you think of Alabama's football team right now? Of course, the loss to Vanderbilt didn't look fantastic against South Carolina. How does this team stack up to your preseason expectations?
Obviously, I thought when you look at the roster, it was going to be one of the best rosters in college football. A lot of talent there. You think, okay, with Kalen DeBoer, one of the best coaching staffs that he was able to assemble as far as, former head coaches, former defensive coordinators, just a lot of great minds on both sides of the football. You talk about maybe the support staff off the field. You talk about the administration. I just thought Alabama was set up, even though Nick Saban, greatest college football coach of all time, I thought Alabama would be able to keep things rolling. But really, in hindsight, maybe I overplayed that a little bit because there was so much transition. I mean, not only is it an entirely new coaching staff, it's new approaches, it's new philosophy, schemes, everything else. But you had to replace your top 2 running backs, your top 3 pass catchers, 2 of your 5 offensive linemen, and one of your other offensive linemen to transfer it out and miss the entire spring and miss the first couple of games. You lose your, leading tackler in Caleb Downs. You lose 2, day one talents at corner. You lose, you're by far your top 2 pass rushers who are also day 1, day 2 talents. So, I mean, there was always going to be a major transition here. And I think Alabama is still trying to figure some things out as far as, it's not just the coaching staff, it's also the players, how the pecking order is going to look at certain spots. And it's caused, some up and down play. But I mean, really, a lot of people in college football are dealing with something similar, right? I mean, with the transfer portal, you got way more guys going out than you normally do as far as NFL draft and simple graduation. That's going to cause a lot of issues with depth, and you're going to have a lot of new transfer portal players that you're adding. So it's a different look for everybody. This is not just an Alabama problem, but I think with all the transition that's been going on with the coaching staff and all that too, post Nick Saban, I think it's caused some issues.
Clint, how understanding is Bama Nation on the idea that college football just is never going to be what even Nick Saban himself probably could not do what Nick Saban did in college football in this era with NIL and the transfer portal. How understanding of Kalen DeBoer are they going to be of that?
Well, it depends on who you ask, but half of them want him fired already, and we're halfway through the season. Which, granted, anytime there was a loss under Nick Saban, it was incredible. You still had a small percentage of the fan base that always said things like, "I think the game's just passed Nick Saban by. He probably needs to step away." So there was always overreaction from Alabama fans. But it is really. You're 100% correct. I mean, you saw it. I mean, Alabama hadn't won a national championship since 2020. They aren't able to have the stacked rosters. They can add key players in the transfer portal that really makes an impact to your starting lineup. But one of the things that really helped Alabama through the early portions of the Nick Saban era was the fact that they were stacked at virtually every position. So, when you had injuries happen, you had guys pretty much ready to step up. I always thought Nick Saban did a good job of having depth prepared. You started seeing that fall off a little bit. The perfect example would be the 2021 national championship against Georgia when Jamison Williams and John Mechie weren't available. Receivers, some of those young guys weren't ready to step up and make an impact, and it made a huge difference in that game. But it is a lot different now than it was, and Nick Saban saw the writing on the wall. I mean, as soon as the season was over last year, really what kind of pushed him towards retirement was the fact that you had guys in his office asking for more money and more playing time. And he just realized, I mean, this isn't this isn't how he wanted to have built his program, or had he built his program. And it's something that everybody's dealing with. It's not just Alabama, but Kalen DeBoer is certainly catching some heat, and so is Kane Wommack, the defensive coordinator, because there's just been too much inconsistency on that side of the football. And I mean, it doesn't really matter, who you are. Alabama fans are going to criticize when they feel like it's warranted, and whether it's warranted or not really is up for debate. But it's certainly been some up and down up to this point, and fans are certainly applying the pressure.
If I made you pick one word to describe the reaction to the Vanderbilt loss, I know we're going back a couple of weeks, but if you had to pick one word to describe that reaction by Bama's fan base, what would it be?
Devastating, I guess, would probably be the word of choice. I mean, there's several you could go with. Shocking would certainly play into that. I don't think people realize Vanderbilt's pretty good. I this isn't your typical Vanderbilt, and that's hard for people to wrap their minds around, because not only is it the name Vanderbilt, but it's also the fact that they lost to Georgia State. I don't think enough people take into account that they had Missouri, a top 10 opponent, and Alabama coming up. We've seen teams kind of look ahead before. That probably played a small part in it, but I mean, Vanderbilt, what they do offensively is difficult to contain. It's difficult to prepare for when you've only got a week and you've got just a gamer at quarterback. I mean, Pavia is a phenomenal player, a lot of fun to watch, and they've also added some other talent really on both sides of the football that can make some plays. And so I don't think fans quite realize how difficult of a game that actually was, even though you can't say anything about the road environment. I mean, it felt like Alabama had 80% of the crowd. So, that really has nothing to do with it. It's just, after a very emotional game against Georgia, Alabama wasn't prepared, whether it be from a coaching standpoint or a player standpoint. I don't think fans were ready. I don't think they were giving the Vanderbilt the credit that they deserved, and they paid for it dearly. But I would say devastating is how a lot of fans feel, and that's why both Kane Wommack and Kalen DeBoer are now on the hot seat, quote unquote, according to some fans, because there's this belief that never would have happened under Nick Saban.
It's kind of like going to a party at P. Diddy's place, and you didn't do anything bad, but it's really difficult to convince people that it's not a bad loss against Vanderbilt, who I agree with you is better than we thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to point out Diego Pavia at the end of last year's regular season, beat Auburn and Jacksonville State, and then he beat Alabama this year. So he's beaten 3 of the 5 Division I schools in Alabama for the majority of his last few wins. Clint, I want to get to kind of one of the underrated things about Nick Saban and where this goes with Kalen DeBoer, because I actually liked the Kalen DeBoer hire. I think he's a good offensive mind. He's got a unique twist on the air raid that I think led him to a lot of great wins at a lower level. How underrated, though, do you think, even among Alabama fans, was Nick Saban's offensive acumen? I know he was a defensive guru, but I felt like he could have, if he wanted to, been an offensive coordinator in Alabama and let the defense take over and been just as successful, because it seemed like, am I right in thinking he's the one who kind of took over the offense halfway through last year and said, this is what we're doing with Jalen Milro, and we're going to simplify things, and that's how things got turned around?
That's a difficult question to answer. I would say that certainly played a part. I think Tommy Rees, it felt like maybe he was really wanting Tyler Buckner to be his quarterback, or he had dual threat guys, but really guys who could do more of the mental processing than where Jalen Milro was early last year. Just from what Rees probably wanted in his quarterback, Milro didn't really have a lot of those attributes at that time. And so that caused some early season struggles. I think more than anything, it was almost the team declaring what Alabama was going to be. And I mean, against South Florida, it was pretty evident guys wanted Jalen Milro to be the starter. And there was even some rumors about guys not playing as hard as a result of, kind of in a boycott type of situation, which very shocking under Nick Saban that could even be potentially true. But from that point forward, Milro was the starter. And I think Alabama embraced that they were going to have to change some things up with the offense in order to play to his strengths. He's always viewed himself as a pocket passer. He's told people that in interviews multiple times. He doesn't want to really be a dual threat guy, but you're too talented at it. I mean, not only can you run the football, but you can handle volume. He's a powerful runner. He can handle, 15, 20 carries if you really need him to, which Alabama has absolutely needed him to over the last couple of years. And so he's embraced that. He did that more at the end of last season. But then also this year, he's certainly embraced it, and it's made a huge impact for Alabama's offense since he's been able to do that. He's one of the most talented players in all of college football. I don't think he's playing his best football though over the last couple of weeks, and I'll be curious to see going into Neyland Stadium. I think that's a pretty big storyline with where he's kind of been trending the last couple of weeks, where the offense has been trending. on top of the fact that you've got a very hostile environment and, still a very good Tennessee defense.
No, true. Let me with Jalen Milro in particular. He didn't play a great game last week, and a couple interceptions. Then there was the intentional grounding that was a safety. I mean, while he's an exciting player, I'm not sure he's a great player because of the mistakes that he's had throughout his career. How would you describe him? And then if you can take it a step further, how would you describe him fitting into this offense?
I think, he's one of those guys. I think he's been trying to be Superman, especially this past weekend because of what happened against Vanderbilt. He probably felt like Alabama didn't have as many opportunities as they wanted offensively. I mean, Vanderbilt had the football for 42 of the 60 minutes. Alabama still managed to score 35 points in 18 minutes or, just under 18 minutes of time of possession, which is really efficient. But it's too much up and down. It's a very boom or bust offense right now. And a lot of that's the result of Jalen Milro. I do feel like that he's really taken a step forward as far as, when teams are blitzing him, understanding where his hot reads are, being able to work through his progressions a little bit more. He's not limited to legs or vertical shots like he was last year. And I really think that's helped Alabama's offense. But when you have a defensive front like South Carolina and a defense that can, generate some turnovers, on top of the fact that maybe Alabama's offensive line hadn't been overly tested. Like you even look, Wisconsin just doesn't really have a great defensive front, if I'm speaking candidly. Georgia is very talented up front, but they're kind of like, under Nick Saban, the way that they do things schematically with the two gapping and all that, it's not really going to apply a ton of pressure on your quarterback. South Carolina with their two defensive ends, man, they'll pin their ears back and get after you. And I think that caused the tackle some trouble. And I think that caused Jalen Milro some trouble. And he was, kind of got into some old habits when things around him started going wrong. So if you can keep the things around him going right, then, I think he could end up being, continue to be one of the better players in the country. But he's got to also overcome some of that and understand just because everything's not going great around you doesn't mean you have to kind of fall off like everything else. I mean, protect the football is the first and foremost thing that you need to be worrying about as a quarterback. And, that's something that he's certainly going to have to improve on this weekend in a very hostile environment.
Wait, who does that sound like? Tackles having troubles and a quarterback that's not going through a progression. That sounds a lot like Tennessee. Our poll question on the YouTube page is this. Vols are 1.5-point underdogs. Let me ask you, Clint, what do you think of that line? Is it just right, too low, too high?
It's crazy how similar Tennessee and Alabama have been this year. I mean, not from a team standpoint necessarily. There's elements of the team that's kind of similar. Like you said, struggles at tackle and, quarterback play and some of the limitations that can come with that. But it's more so of, Tennessee loses to Arkansas, Alabama loses to Vanderbilt. Tennessee struggles against Florida, Alabama struggles against South Carolina. It's interesting to watch how, I'm actually kind of surprised. If I would have had to put it, one way, the fact that Alabama's on the road, I probably would have said Tennessee should probably be about a 1.5 or 2 point favorite. And so the fact that it's going in the other direction, that probably has to do with, I'm sure, a lot of people still, Alabama's helmet is going to, it's going to have an impact as far as Vegas and how they kind of do things because people bet on Alabama quite a bit. But as far as if it was in Tuscaloosa, I wouldn't be shocked at all with the line. That would feel about right to me. With it being in Neyland, in Knoxville, I don't know. I kind of think Tennessee should be favored. But this is very much a toss-up game. I've already been looking at it quite a bit over the last probably 24 hours or so. And I've already gone back and forth as far as who I think should, who I think's probably going to win. And I'm sure that will continue. It's just there's elements of this as you're kind of discovering who Tennessee is and who they've been on top of, what they were or kind of trending towards before and then what they are now. It's very tough to understand exactly what you're going to get. Like Tennessee and Alabama, to an extent, they've both been kind of Jekyll and Hyde. And so, you can't predict going in which one you're going to get from either team. And a lot, the outcome will certainly depend on that, in my opinion. But I would probably say with Tennessee having the home field advantage, I probably would lean Tennessee a little bit right now.
Clint,
Sorry, go ahead, Caleb. My bad.
So in addition to the line, the over-under is set at 53.5, and all of conventional wisdom is saying to take the under in this game because of that. So I got a question. How much do you think that over-under being that high is the fact that they think there's going to be a defensive touchdown somewhere in this game?
You know, Kane Womack, that is one thing about his defenses is, you know, it struggled. I think they're kind of at times it's almost felt like Alabama's held back in some games, and you know, it's some games that they've ended up being, you know, very close wins or losses. I don't think it was that was the case against South Carolina, but against South Florida stands out. Western Kentucky to an extent. Second half against Georgia, I felt like as far as showing Carson Beck different pictures, pre-snap, post-snap, they changed up a lot of that stuff. But you know, what it does do is it is supposed to generate turnovers. A lot of people want the sacks. You know, when you had Will Anderson and Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner, Alabama was up there, you know, near the top of the country in sacks. And the way that Kane Womack's defense sets up, it's more pressure into turnovers rather than pressure into sacks. So that's one side of it. And then Tennessee, I mean, the fact that Jalen Milro's been turning the football over, the fact that Tennessee's got a really good defense and they're playing at home, you would think, you know, also a lot of people probably think that Tennessee is going to be able to generate at least a couple of turnovers in this game. And so, I mean, one being a pick six, I mean, that would make sense. I would say, though, I'm kind of with you. As much as, you know, you think about like Kalen DeBoer and Josh Heupel going into a game, you would assume take the over, whatever it is. I mean, that's two of the best offensive minds in college football. When you actually start watching the teams and understanding kind of how they're operating right now, you know, the fact that Tennessee's not taking a ton of vertical shots, it seems like the fact that Alabama's been doing a lot of that, but when you're able to apply pressure on Jalen Milroe, really they condense the field a lot and they try to get the football out of his hands as quickly as possible. I mean, it's kind of set up where it is going to be a low scoring game.
Clint, if you can just give me kind of keys to the game, what Alabama needs to do to be victorious against the Vols. They are the favorites, but it's pretty close.
Well, I think one of Tennessee's big problems the last couple of weeks is that they haven't been able to establish their run game as effectively as as they had, you know, in previous games. And they're such a heavy inside run team. I think Alabama's interior defensive line is going to be really important. They've actually been, you know, susceptible to giving up interior runs. Vanderbilt did it a little bit early. Alabama adjusted and really tried to take that away, but that opened up some of the stuff out there on the perimeter with that triple option offense. I feel like that, you know, Alabama and whether they're able to contain Tennessee's run game, start with the interior run game and then kind of play it out from there, put more of the game on Nico's shoulders. If you can do that, I like Alabama's chances, even if they are on the road. But, you know, that remains to be seen. And then on the other side of the football, I think Jalen Milroe has to limit the turnovers like we've been talking about. I do think that they kind of need to get his legs going a little bit more, like in those first few games, you know, 4 games. You know, he was doing a lot of really good things on the ground against Vanderbilt and South Carolina. It kind of feels like they've kind of pulled back a little bit on that. I think they tried to force the traditional run game with Justice Haynes and Jam Miller against South Carolina. It's just for whatever reason, the offensive line isn't generating the movement that a lot of people, myself included, thought they would be able to going into the year. And you're starting to understand why the identity of this team has been more of Milroe's legs and then whatever they can get through the air. And so I'll be curious to see how they end up playing off of that a little bit. But if they can't get their own traditional run game going, then a lot's going to be put on Milroe's shoulders. He's going to probably start to feel some of that Superman pressure. And can he be Superman? And in that type of environment, I don't think that would bode well for Alabama. So, you know, I think there's a couple of things at play here that will really determine a lot. But if you know, I think the run games for both teams is really important because you want to take as much pressure off your quarterback. Tennessee's because, you know, Nico's really young. Alabama's because they're on the road, but really the same result in what you're trying to achieve.
Clint, last thing I want to ask you this. Were you more surprised that Alabama lost to Vanderbilt or that they didn't bounce back in a big way against South Carolina?
I'm probably more shocked that they lost to Vanderbilt. You know, I mean, you go back to like that 2015 season, Alabama lost to Ole Miss. The following week, Arkansas was not great that year. They barely squeak out a 14-13 win. Last year against Texas, They lose by double digits in Bryant-Denny Stadium, something we hadn't really seen in the Nick Saban era. Now, granted, Texas was a really, really good football team, a college football playoff team, but then the following week you get USF. You think it's a get-right game, and granted, the weather didn't cooperate. Jalen Milro was benched. So there were some, external factors that kind of played into how that game played out. But just you saw the same thing where just it wasn't this bounce back performance like you were expecting. And like I said, I think right now they're really trying to get back to the basics on some of this and determine how they want to go about, especially playing defense. And it's a major transition with a lot of different moving pieces. I think they're slowly figuring some things out, just like I think Tennessee's, continuing to try to figure some things out. It's just going to take a little bit of time, and I don't know if they've got time this weekend against Tennessee.
Yep. Hey, great stuff, Clint. Sorry to keep you this long. We usually try not to do that, but you just kept throwing heat.
I appreciate it, guys. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Clint Lamb. Again, where can we follow your work again?
CoverCrimson.com. You can go follow the YouTube page, Cover Crimson, and at Clint R. Lamb on Twitter.
All right, buddy. We appreciate you. Thank you.
No problem.